ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Stop, Look, and Listen. I'm your host, LaTroy Gardner. This week, we have an American hero. We have former NASA administrator, an entrepreneur, a retired US Marine Corps Major General, an astronaut. We have the Honorable Charles F. Bolden, but you can call him Charlie. Welcome to the show, Charlie.
Good to be with you, LaTroy. It's fantastic and good to be able to talk to folk back home in South Carolina.
Exactly. That 843 represented here, and I know you're an 803 representative. You grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. Just talk about your childhood and discovering.
In fact, my wife and I, Jackie used to be Jackie Walker for people who are from Columbia, so they may know her. Her mother and her mom and dad, like my mom and dad, were school teachers. Her mom and dad ended up being principals, I think, at the elementary school level. And but her father and my father had played football together at what was then Booker T. Washington. That was one of the two black high schools in Columbia in the 40s when they were in school. My mom and dad both went to Johnson C. Smith. Her mom and dad went to Benedict College in Columbia. And but all came back to South Carolina to teach. So Jackie and I were both born there in the same hospital, what used to be Good Samaritan Waverly Hospital. That was the black hospital in Columbia. And we went through kindergarten together and then separated for elementary school, but got back together in junior high and high school. So we had the typical education for young black middle class kids in South Carolina. I was fortunate enough to be able to go away now and then in the summertime. And when I didn't travel to New York to visit my cousins and my aunts and get an opportunity to live in Harlem each summer, 2 summers I went away to school for National Science Foundation Summer Institutes. And those were kind of the things that really kind of blazed the trail for me and allowed me to be exposed to an integrated environment, find out that I could hold my own in that environment, that the white kids weren't any smarter than I was, and that if I was willing to study and work as my mom and dad had always told me, I'd be able to compete. And so that was sort of the beginning. I played sports a lot. I grew up in a swimming pool. We had Drew Park Pool in Columbia at the time. It was the Olympic-sized pool that was built to match Maxie Gregg Park. You're too young to know, but back in those days, in the days of separate but equal, they tried their best. So if the whites had a swimming pool, we had to have a swimming pool that was similar to it. And we were the Drew Park Sharks. I forgot what the name of the Maxie Gregg swim team was, but we could not swim against them because of segregation. But every Monday morning or Sunday morning, actually, we could look at our times in the paper, and we always knew that we were as good or better than they were because our times were always better. So I grew up in a swimming pool, played Little League baseball, played football for my dad at C.A. Johnson High School. I tell everybody I was a mediocre second string quarterback. I couldn't throw, I couldn't run very fast, but I was smart. And so I made the team. And I can remember every time he put me in the game, he would remind me, do not pass the ball. Do not pass the ball. But I saw a program on television when I was in 7th grade about life at the Naval Academy called Men of Annapolis, and decided that's where I wanted to go to college. So after that was what I set my heart on. And I ended up getting a chance to go to the Naval Academy, graduating and accepting my commission in the Marine Corps. And that was sort of the beginning of what is now, my life's history.
So let's backpedal to your childhood. When did you discover your love for science? And when did you start affirming the goal of wanting to go to space one day?
I think I always liked science. I can't remember a time that I didn't. It used to drive my mom crazy, but we lived in the city, but there were woods on either side of our house and quite convenient. So one of my favorite hobbies, I guess, or things to do would be to go turn over rocks and look under rotting wood and find snakes, little snakes. And, I'd keep them for a while and then let them go. But I love snakes, and I knew what poisonous snakes were. And I knew how to avoid them and everything in South Carolina with rattlesnakes and copperheads. We had just about every variety of domestic poisonous snake known to man. The water moccasin was the one that always scared everybody because we like to swim in the river and in lakes and the like, and so or play around in it. The unfortunate thing was, as in most Black communities, most of the kids, except around my community where we had Drew Park, many kids didn't know how to swim. But I love snakes, and I think the thing that sealed the deal for me was seventh grade. I had a science teacher. He was a rare person. His name was James P. Neal, and he was my seventh grade science teacher, and he encouraged me to get into science fairs. He really pushed science fairs at the middle school level. And I did my first science fair and I never looked back. I fell in love with doing projects and the like. I remember when I got to high school, my classmate was a guy named Gary Bell. His brother, he had an older brother named Thaddeus Bell, and Thad and Gary and I all played for my dad on the C.A. Johnson Green Hornets football team. Both Thad and Gary were tight ends, and like I said, I was a mediocre quarterback. But Thad was really interested in science all the time. Ended up becoming a medical doctor. Lives in Charleston now. But Thad let me help him. I remember his senior year, he was doing a project where he was studying the effects of ultraviolet radiation on bacteria. And the two of us went out to Fort Jackson there in Columbia and went to Moncrief Hospital. And I don't know how Thad did it, but he must have known somebody. But we managed to get into the laboratory, and the docs and the technicians there gave us supplies. So they gave us Petri dishes, and they gave us the kind of tools that we could do to go off and find different kinds of bugs and put them in the Petri dishes to see, how they cultured when we exposed them to different kinds of light. And that was Thad's experiment. I was mesmerized by that. Plus, really could not believe what Mr. Mr. Neal had exposed me to. And like I said, I don't think I missed a year after seventh grade participating in science fairs at every level. So that kind of sealed it for me. Never had a desire to go to space. Never dreamed of being an astronaut. Again, going back to my childhood in Columbia, everything was segregated, so that even the theaters. But on the weekends, we were allowed to go to I think it was the Carolina Theater on Main Street in Columbia. And we were allowed to go in for the Saturday matinees. We had to sit up in the balcony away from all the white patrons, but we were able to sit up there. And every Saturday morning, I remember they always had one science fiction movie and one cowboy movie. So you saw Lash LaRue and Hopalong Cassidy and the Lone Ranger, but my favorite science fiction character was always Buck Rogers. And I loved it because Buck Rogers walked out to his spaceship like we walked to a car. That the spaceship flew off to Mars and came back all in the same day. And I was really infatuated by that. And I thought about it, but still, because I was growing up in a segregated society, I knew about astronauts. In the 60s, NASA was beginning to get into human spaceflight, and John Kennedy set the goal for us going to the moon, and all that was again mesmerizing to me. But I didn't see anybody who looked like me in the space program, so that was not something that I ever dreamed of doing. Kind of interesting though, because on Men of Annapolis, there were no Blacks at the Naval Academy. So I decided I wanted to go there, but yet I decided I couldn't be an astronaut. But it was, long story, it was not until I actually came into the Marine Corps, which was something I said I would never do. Went to flight school and became a pilot, which was something I said I would never do. And I ended up as a test pilot, naval test pilot in a place called Patuxent River, Maryland. And I got there the same year that NASA selected its first group of space shuttle astronauts. And that group was historic because it included another South Carolinian, the late great Dr. Ron McNair from Lake City, South Carolina. Ron was one of the 3 Blacks in the class, all male, unfortunately. But they also had 6 females in the class. So that was the first time that NASA had integrated its astronaut corps. So there were women, minorities, and that kind of piqued my interest, but still didn't make me want to go to space. But I had the opportunity to meet Ron McNair on a trip that he made to Patuxent River with some of his Navy and Marine Corps friends, came back for a reunion at test pilot school. And I saw this black guy get out of the back of the airplane, and I knew NASA had selected 3 folk, but never in my wildest imagination did I think that I would have an opportunity to meet one of them. And here was Ron McNair emerging from the back seat of this 2-place supersonic, sleek looking white jet that the NASA astronauts flew. And Ron bounded across the flight line as proud as he could be. And I ran up and met him and introduced myself. And we spent the weekend talking about growing up in South Carolina, talking about his decision to go to North Carolina A&T and study physics because he wanted to be an astronaut. He had always wanted to be an astronaut. Taught himself physics and calculus at Carver High School in Lake City because they didn't have either course. And then got an offer from MIT to come and do his doctoral work. Was a little reluctant to go because he wasn't sure he could compete, but he was talked into it and went and earned a PhD in laser physics. And then after working for a while for Hughes Aerospace and doing some other things, applied for the space program when NASA asked for people to apply in 1977. And he was selected among that very first group of 35, half of whom were civilians. And I was mesmerized by talking to Ron. But before he went to get back in his NASA T-38, he said, "Hey, are you going to apply for the space program?" I said, "Not on your life." And he looked at me real strange. He said, "Why not?" I said, "Ron, they'd never pick me." And he got a really stern look on his face. He said, "You know, that is the dumbest thing I ever heard. How do you know if you don't ask?" And more than anything else, I was embarrassed because my mom and dad had always told me that I could do anything I wanted to do. You know, that's the way they raised my brother and me. You can do anything you want to do if you're willing to work hard and study hard and not be afraid of failure, not be afraid of people telling you no. And I had forgotten that. And so when Ron got back in his airplane, I went home all embarrassed and I pulled out pen and paper and I sent my application in through the Marine Corps to NASA to become an astronaut. We had an opportunity to go down to Houston and be interviewed. And much to my shock, got a call several months later asking me if I still wanted to be an astronaut and telling me that I had been selected in the second group of space shuttle astronauts. So my family and I talked about it and we said, we'll go. And that started my 14-year journey as a member of NASA's astronaut corps, having an opportunity to go to space 4 times. So something I never dreamed of doing and I never would have done had it not been for that chance meeting with Ron McNair.
Okay, beautiful story. So you pretty much just mentioned about the lessons that your parents taught you. So I'm guessing one of the first times that it was put to the test was when you decided you wanted to go to the US Naval Academy, but there were some obstacles along the way. Could you just speak on the process of getting appointed?
Yeah, you might call them obstacles. For those that may not know, you don't just apply to a service academy like you do to a normal college. There's a process whereby you have to get an appointment or a nomination, and there are limited places where they come from. So you can get an appointment or a nomination from your congressional representative. In my case, it was Albert Watson. You can get an appointment from the 2 US senators in your state. Mine were Bolden Jr. and the legendary Strom Thurmond. And the 3 people in my congressional delegation made it very clear my senior year. They had humored me as I applied all the way from 9th grade, but my senior year, when it got serious, they all notified me that there was no way in the world they were going to appoint a black to any service academy. Although I think Albert Olin D. Johnston later offered me an appointment to the Merchant Marine Academy, which I said I really wasn't interested in. But everyone is also eligible at large for an appointment from the vice president. So I had been writing to Vice President Johnson for a couple of years, and he like others, I got a letter back saying, "Hey, it's too early. When you're a senior, write back and we'll talk about it." And my senior year, I remember it was November 22nd. My team had won the upper state championship in the black conference, and we were getting on the bus to go to Charleston, South Carolina to play Burke High School for the state championship. And we got on the bus and my uncle was the team doctor. He was a physician, and we drove past my house and stopped and picked him up, and he got on the bus, and he's a jovial guy, but he got on and he was really somber and sort of red-eyed that day and didn't say a word. And as we were riding out of town, my dad asked him what was wrong. And he said, "The president's been assassinated." So we had all learned that President Kennedy had been assassinated. That was I tell people it was a really, really dark day for me, because not only had the country, had I lost my president, but I saw any opportunity to go to the Naval Academy evaporate, because now I wasn't eligible for an appointment from now President Lyndon Johnson. So this source of appointment that I had been nurturing went away instantly. Following in my mom and dad's teaching, though, that you never give up on anything, I pulled out pen and paper and I wrote a letter to the president, to President Johnson. And I said, hey, this is me. You and I have been talking for a while. I really, really, really want to go to the Naval Academy and I need your help. Never heard from the president, but within weeks, I got a visit from a Navy recruiter who said, I understand that you want to go to the Naval Academy, and let me help you through the process. And then within weeks, a retired federal judge came to my high school. President Johnson had selected Judge Bennett to travel around the country looking for young qualified Black men that he could consider for input to the service academies. And I ended up getting an appointment from Congressman William Dawson in Chicago, Illinois. So although I grew up in South Carolina and that was my home, through the Naval Academy Candidate Guidance Office and I guess the work of the president, I ended up with an appointment to the Naval Academy from Congressman Dawson. And I ended up there in the class of 1968, summer of 1964. I went there bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I tell everybody I was a snotty-nosed kid, totally unprepared for what I was going to find. I mean, it was physically demanding. Annapolis was a segregated city and a segregated state. Maryland was still segregated in 1964. And so we were living on this island, the Naval Academy yard. There were only 7 of us, 7 Blacks in my class. By the time we got through plebe year, the first year, we were down to 4. And so we graduated. We stayed together, and the 4 of us graduated in 1968. But during that time, I found that it was not very much unlike being in South Carolina, except the racism was much more overt, was much more covert, actually. It was, people tried to hide it, unlike in South Carolina, where you knew where you could go. There were signs that said Blacks only and whites only, or colored only and whites only. It wasn't like that around the Naval Academy. And there were people who had never seen a Black person, who were my classmates. And I must say, in general, my classmates were very, very receptive and warm to me and my other Black classmates. But there were other members of the brigade when they came back in the fall who were not. I had 2 white midshipmen, one from South Carolina and one from Alabama, who were in my company, and they were juniors. And they walked into my room one night, closed the door, and said, Mr. Bolden, we're here to let you know you're not going to graduate. And this was my freshman year. I said, with all due respect, what makes you think that I'm not going to graduate? And they said, because we're not going to let you. We aren't going to let you get out of your plebe year. And little did they know it, but I'd been calling home and crying every night every weekend to my mom and dad that I wanted out. I hated the place. After wanting to go there from 7th grade, I got there and it was an unfriendly place, and I didn't want to have any part to do with it. Plus, it was hard. And my dad, in his he had this saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. And so his response when I cried saying I wanted to come home every week was, hang in there one more week. That night with those 2 white midshipmen who threatened me, it really made the words that my dad told me stick out. And I said, look, I may hate this place, but I am not leaving. I'm not going to let them drive me out of here. So I hung in there for one more year, which was plebe year. And after that, and their unsuccess in getting me out, things got pretty well after that. We didn't become friends, but we at least spoke after that. And I think they forgot it. I hope, but nonetheless, I managed to graduate. So that was my experience getting to and through the Naval Academy.
So not only was there plenty of fighting a dog, you ended up graduating the academy as president of the class.
I did. And, and I always told my classmates, I think they didn't know what they were doing. So,
so after leaving the US Naval Academy, you was commissioned 2nd lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. I'm from Beaufort, South Carolina, home of Parris Island, where they make the Marines. So just talk about your mindset heading into your assignment in Vietnam. Was there ever any fear of not returning home,
Uh,
or just some of the scenes that just made it kind of difficult to survive? Because I know like a lot of Marines that end up getting orders and well getting called to serve in a war.
Mhm.
It's always that thought of, why did I sign up to this? Sign up for this.
Yeah,
Did
yeah.
you have the same experience?
Interestingly, Troy, and you come from Beaufort, so let me go back a little bit. I told you that I never wanted to be a Marine. And I think the reason I didn't was Beaufort wasn't that far from Columbia. And
Hmm.
and on the weekends, particularly after graduation at boot camp, the Marines, the soldiers from Fort Jackson, the airmen from Shaw, everybody descended on Columbia. And the Black service members descended on Drew Park, which was this big park. They came to the swimming pool, they came to watch the sports, they came there, and then they fought.
Hmm.
And it was usually the Marines that were always the troublemakers, always starting the fights and everything. And so I thought Marines were crazy. And I didn't want to have anything to do with them. I'm not sure what it was like growing up in Beaufort, where you were pretty close to them. So all the way through my childhood into the Naval Academy, the one service I was not even going to consider was the Marine Corps. So I was destined to go into the Navy, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I could drive ships or something. Had no desire to fly airplanes. I thought that was inherently dangerous. But my very first year, I mean, coming out of the summer where the two white midshipmen had told me they were not going to let me through the Naval Academy, my company officer, the commissioned officer responsible for my small 150 person group in my company, was a gentleman by the name of Major John Riley Love. He was a young white guy who was a major in the Marine Corps, a veteran of Vietnam, infantry officer. He was absolutely spectacular. He reminded me of my dad. He was tough, but eminently fair, very compassionate and caring. And he had a leadership style that, again, reminded me of my dad. He could discipline you, but frequently it was by making you feel about that big because you had disappointed him. So
Hmm.
he made you feel really bad when you didn't live up to his expectation. And 4 years later, when it was time to graduate, I looked back to my plebe year and I said, I want to be like him. I want to be like Major Love. And I want to be an infantry officer. My family went crazy. My dad cried like a baby. Everybody in my family cried because they knew what a Marine did and they knew what the expectations were with Vietnam raging. The Tet Offensive had occurred the year before I graduated from the Naval Academy and everything. But I just decided I wanted to be like him. And when I accepted my commission and went to Quantico, Virginia for 6 months of what we call the basic school, I found out one thing: I did not like crawling around in the mud. Even though I, loved to play with snakes and be out in the woods and in the river and creek, and I did not like crawling around in the mud, and especially when it was cold. And my graduation was in December in Quantico, Virginia. There was snow and ice on the ground, and we had a 3-day war that we had to go through. It was an exercise that you had to pass to get, to graduate and go on to the fleet. And I thought I was going to freeze. And coming out of that exercise, I went home and I told my wife, I think you're right. She had always tried to get me to decide I was going to accept an aviation option I brought from the Naval Academy and go to Pensacola to flight school. And I said, I don't want to go to flight school. I don't want to fly airplanes. And I came home after the 3-day war and I said, I think you're right. Let's go to Pensacola. And so I went in the next day and told my company officer, okay, I want to go ahead and accept my aviation option and I'll go to Pensacola. And we went down and I started flight training. Very first time I got in an airplane and we lifted off, I could not believe it. I couldn't believe the thrill, the feeling and everything. And I fell in love with flying that day. And the rest is kind of history. And the more I flew and fell in love with it, I had instructors who encouraged me and mentored me and served as role models. And one of them was a test pilot, a Marine Corps test pilot, who just really took me under his wing, talked about what it was like to be a test pilot, the challenge of it, but the reward. And I decided that, okay, I want to be a test pilot one of these days. And so that's what I started trying to do from my first day in a Marine Corps squadron. It took me, it took me about 6 years to finally get the Marine Corps to accept me into test pilot school. But I went there. And as I said, that's where I met Ron. But you go back to your question about Vietnam. Once I made the decision to come into the Marine Corps, and I made the decision that I wanted to be an infantry officer, I recognized fully what that meant. The fact that I was going to go to war, I was going to have to go, and I was going to have to participate in combat, because I had chosen, or I was going to choose an area that's called combat arms. And so you're going to go to war, like it or not. And that was something that I accepted out of out of the Naval Academy. When I finally changed my mind and decided I was going to go to aviation, and I selected jets, and I selected the A-6 Intruder, which was an all-weather attack aircraft, then I knew for sure I was going to go to war, because the Marine Corps uses its aviation to support the Marine on the ground. And even though President Nixon had pulled American forces out of Vietnam, he still continued to use Marine Air Forces to support the South Vietnamese. So I spent a year, we lived in Thailand. My squadron was stationed there, but we flew every day in and out of the Vietnams, North and South, Cambodia, Laos, and flew missions almost every day. It was exciting, thrilling, scary, you name it, but it was my responsibility and my job.
So take us from returning home from Vietnam to getting your master's degree from the other USC, Southern California, to being selected as an astronaut candidate by NASA in a span of 6 years.
Yeah.
How does one get selected by NASA?
Let me go back to coming back from Vietnam. I returned from Vietnam, and shockingly, my duty station assignment was to go to Los Angeles, California. Now remember here, my wife and I had never been west of the Mississippi, so we knew zero about Southern California. And recruiting, you need to be a little bit familiar with the area where you are, because you're going to be going into homes and talking to families and everything, and trying to convince them that they should trust their sons and daughters to come into the United States Marine Corps. And I ended up in Los Angeles. And because I was what was called an officer selection officer, an OSO, my job was to visit every one of the more than 100 schools, colleges and universities and junior colleges located in Los Angeles County. I mean, it was a massive county with just an unbelievable number of schools. So during school, every week, 2 days a week, I was on a campus. Well, actually 2 days per campus. So 4 days a week, I was on a campus with my red blanket and my reading material, trying to sell the Marine Corps to students. And it was really interesting. But I did that for 2 years, and it was somewhat rewarding. Learned a lot. But while I was there, my number one campus was the University of Southern California. And I was right out in the middle of this just breathtaking campus. The weather was always 70 degrees and clear. And so, you never had a bad day out there. And they had a big naval ROTC unit, and they would set up a table for me right at the base of Tommy Trojan. And Tommy Trojan is the mascot for the University of Southern California. And in the middle of the campus is this massive Trojan warrior on a pedestal with sword drawn and everything. And that's where the Marine Corps recruiter had my desk and all my stuff. And I saw soon to be professional football players come around. I remember talking to Lynn Swann one time, the infamous Lynn Swann, who played an all-pro career with the Steelers. And Lynn Swann would stop by my table every time I was on campus and look through the aviation literature. Used to talk about wanting to be a Marine Corps pilot, but I could never talk him into taking the test. I met countless football players and other kinds of athletes, and it was great. But I decided that if I wanted to go to test pilot school, I probably had to get a degree. The Marine Corps didn't even consider you if you didn't have a master's degree. So I looked for a degree program at Southern Cal, and they had something that was called a Master of Science in Systems Management. And it was a hybrid between an engineering degree and an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration. And it was run out of what is now the Viterbi School of Engineering. So I took that course, and over a 2-year period of time managed to earn my master's degree from Southern Cal. And that enabled me to later apply through the Marine Corps to NASA, for the space program once I got to become a test pilot. But more importantly, it fit the last little check in the box that I needed for the Marine Corps to send me to test pilot school. So once I got my master's degree, the Marine Corps selected me for input to test pilot school, and they sent me all the way from California back to Maryland to go through the 2-year course of study to become a naval test pilot. And I had a great time doing that, and spent 1 year operating there as a test pilot until I was selected to be an astronaut, having met Ron McNair and like. So that's how it happened in that squished up period of time.
Okay. So you had 4 space shuttle missions with over 680 hours in space. For those of us that will never have the experience, what was it like in space?
Well, first of all, I will say never. Okay, I was not going to be a Marine. I was not going to fly airplanes, and I was definitely not going to be an astronaut. I was not going to space, and all 3 ended up being things that I now am proud to say I've had an opportunity to do. So never say never.
Right.
We've got so many commercial companies today that have the capability of getting to space that almost anyone in your audience, to include you, can have an opportunity to go to space. But what was it like? Unbelievable. It was everything you would imagine plus some. The 2 big ways I describe it are, with 2 human senses. One is the sense of sight, being at that vantage point outside our atmosphere, looking back down on the planet. You don't see the little ball. We're not high enough to do that. We're not like the Apollo astronauts who got far enough away that they could see Earth as a single blue dot. But we see large portions of it. On one of my flights, we were high enough. We were like 600 kilometers or 400 nautical miles above Earth. So we could see more than half of Earth at any given time. You go around Earth once every 90 minutes. So that means, every 45 minutes, the sun's up, and every 45 minutes, it's dark. So you see 16 sunrises and sunsets every normal Earth day. And it is mind boggling. I mean, the sun, you've got this black thing down there that you can hardly see that is our Earth. And after about 45 minutes of darkness, you see this light start to peep up behind it. And all of a sudden, boom, it's like the light behind me that every once in a while when I move my head and you see, that's the way the sun comes up. I mean, if you look like that sunrise right there and boom, all of a sudden it's really bright. Sunset is equally mesmerizing because you go from having that big bright light and Earth kind of rotates around and the sun, it's not moving, but Earth is rotating. And all of a sudden, the sun disappears behind Earth. And so for 45 minutes, it's black dark. But then the stars become absolutely brilliant. So that's the sense of sight. And that's unlike anything you'll ever see down here on the planet. We try to take pictures of it with cameras, but the cameras just don't do it justice. The other thing is the sense of feel. And that is very dynamic from the time you're laying on your back on a launch pad, just laying there, waiting for hours to launch. And when it's time to go, you can hear the countdown in your headset. And when they get to 0, all of a sudden things get really exciting because the engines ignite and boom, 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 vehicle shakes and stuff. In the case of the space shuttle, it literally kind of did something we call the twang because it was attached by the bottom of the 2 solid rocket boosters to the launch pad by 8 bolts. That was the only thing that held up this 4 million pound stack. And so it kind of tilted over a little bit and it got caught by the bolts and then popped back. And it was called the twang. So it took about 7 seconds or so to do this and that. And when you came back, the computers had checked everything out, all the thousands of systems on board and determined, okay, it's okay to go today. And they sent a signal to the 2 solid rocket boosters. And then all hell breaks loose because boom, you feel and hear this explosion of the 2 solid rocket boosters and boom, the vehicle starts to shake and you can feel yourself sink back in your seat ever so slightly as you lift off. And the vehicle rolls around, goes upside down as you make your way into space. Takes 8.5 minutes to get to space, and that's it. So you go from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. At the end of that 8.5 minutes, you've gotten rid of the solid rocket boosters that help push you out of the atmosphere. The main engines on the shuttle turn off. If you're on a SpaceX Crew Dragon nowadays, it's got one stick, so it's got nine engines on it, and in 8.5 minutes, those 8 engines have done their job, and they shut down sequentially And when that happens, you immediately begin to float because you don't have the thrust of the engines pushing you anymore. And all of a sudden, gravity's overcome because you're going so fast. And you've got this force called centrifugal force that's competing with gravity, trying to pull you away from Earth's gravity. And you're in the middle. And so you float. And that's this incredible sensation of weightlessness that you experience for the rest of the time that you're in space. Mine sounds like a lot, 680 hours. That's not a lot at all. That's about 30 days total time over 4 flights. Today's astronauts who live and work on the International Space Station, normal period of time is 6 months. So multiply my time in space by 6, and that'll give you the average amount of time that an astronaut today lives and works in space. We were visitors, or almost tourists-like. They're workers. They're people that go to work, and they live and work there for 6 months at a time.
Okay. So Charlie, speak on the importance of space exploration, not only to this generation, but future generations.
You ask a critical question, because if we're going to spend the money that we spend on space, we need to know why. A point I would try to make to all of your listeners is, anytime you're trying to make a decision about anything in your life, the number one question you should ask should be why. Why should I take this job? Why should I do this? Why should I invest in this? Ask yourself the why, first of all, so that you know what is it that's motivating me to do this thing. And we all should, as citizens and taxpayers in America, we should ask ourselves the question you just asked me: why space exploration? The most important why is because it helps us understand this planet on which we live so much better. When you get away from the planet and you can look back and you can see it the way that I had the opportunity to see it on my 4 space shuttle missions, the concept of our atmosphere and of an environment that protects this planet really comes into stark view, because you see this thin blue line around our Earth, and it's like a shell that surrounds Earth. And it's really, I keep referring to it as a thin blue line. If you take your thumb, you're up there, and you turn your thumb sideways and close one eye, put your thumb up against the atmosphere, it goes away. That's how thin it is. And there's about 10,000 feet of it that contains enough oxygen to keep you and me alive. When you get above 10,000 feet, there's just not enough oxygen for human beings to survive. That's why in airplanes, if you go high enough, you have to have supplemental oxygen. People who jump out of airplanes, they wear oxygen until they get below 10,000 feet where there's enough oxygen to live. So one of the reasons we should go is to explore our planet from that vantage point, so we can understand this environment in which we live much better. It really wakes one up to the importance of caring for the environment. You realize that we live on a single ocean. Earth is a water planet. 75% of our planet is water. And there are these bodies of land called continents or islands or different things that stick up occasionally in this water. But we live on a water planet. And when you look from the vantage point of space, the thing that you see 75% of the time when you're there is water. And you realize that we need to protect the oceans, because whatever we do to one body of water eventually will work its way around the planet to everywhere. So we need to figure out, how do we preserve our environment for the benefit of all humankind? We do lots of medical experiments, lots of biomedical experiments in space. And that's not only to protect astronauts and learn how to keep them safe and healthy while they travel to places like the moon and Mars, but more importantly, it's to try to use the vantage point of microgravity space, where we can do and see a lot of things much more easily than you do here on Earth, because gravity is taken out of the equation. So doing pharmaceuticals research, looking at materials processing, building really strong materials, those kinds of things can be done in space far more efficiently than they can down here on Earth, because gravity is taken out of the equation and gravity doesn't mess things up. So you look at, everybody's familiar with vaccines. With COVID, everybody knows what a vaccine is. Vaccine development generally will go much quicker in space, because again, we can look at the very basic makeup of the virus that we're trying to attack. And what vaccine scientists are trying to do is design something that will actually marry that virus. People talk about the spike protein of people are accustomed to seeing this circle, this little ball with all the spikes and stuff. If we can get a picture of that protein molecule and see how it's shaped, then scientists can build something that goes in and matches it and kills it, for all intents and purposes, but makes it unable to attack the human body. And that kind of stuff is done much more efficiently and effectively when we're on microgravity environment of space. We're now using 3D printing, a process that you may be familiar with. I know a lot of the kids in your audience know it very well because they have 3D printers in their classrooms. But we have 3D printers on board the International Space Station today, where we're developing technologies to build materials, whether they're components for satellites or components for rockets in space. So we take the feedstock, we take powder or strips of metal or plastic or whatever it is we want to build it with. We take that material with us to space. Takes a lot less energy than it does to take a completed rocket or a completed satellite. And we're going to build those particular things in space in the microgravity environment, but using 3D printing and the like. So just a few examples of why we should do it.
Okay, cool. So just speak on your relationship with President Barack Obama and being appointed the 12th administrator of NASA. Like, did he call you personally, or how did that process work out?
Interesting question, because I hate to disappoint people, but as the NASA administrator, I wasn't a member of the cabinet, so I didn't get to see the president every day. I got to see him quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Anytime he did anything that was science or engineering or technology oriented, then the heads of the science agencies and departments, we always got an invitation from the president that said, "Hey, I'm doing this. Come on over to the White House and help me." And so we were there quite frequently. He put on a science fair every year where he brought 300 or so kids in from all over the United States with their science fair projects and let them put them up all over the White House. He was fascinated by that, and he would take time in the week that they were there and go out and actually walk around and mess with every single experiment and talk to the students. He was just magic that way. He was an incredible person to be around, as was Mrs. Obama. So I wish I could say I saw them every day. They were my best pals, but they weren't. We got a chance to interact with them now and then. But the good thing was he didn't call me every day. In fact, he never called me. And I found out I kind of felt neglected because I never heard from the president in my first year. And I complained about it, and word got back to the president's, the head of the president's cabinet, the cabinet secretary, who was a guy named Chris Liu. And Chris called me and said, "Hey, I understand you're feeling unloved." He said, "Why don't you come over and have a cup of coffee?" So I went over to the White House the next morning, and we went into the White House mess and sat down and had a cup of coffee. And he said, "Look, I understand how you feel. Everybody wants to talk to the president all the time." He said, "You got to understand one thing. Unless the president's not happy with what you're doing, you're not going to hear from him." He said, "If you don't ever hear from the president, just count your blessings, because it means you're doing a great job. He's happy with it, because he's got other people he's calling every single day because they're not doing well." So he said, I understand you want to be around the president all the time. You want to hear from him. Ain't going to happen as long as you're doing well. So I never heard, I never got I actually went to him a few times to complain about something that was about to happen. And he gave me the respect of saying, "Okay, come on over, let's talk about it. And let me hear your case." Only happened 3 times that I can remember. One of them was about the budget. And another time was about when we were getting ready to send him down to the Kennedy Space Center to try to make happy with the space world, because we had announced that we were going to phase out of the shuttle, by 2010, which did not come as good news to a lot of the space shuttle enthusiasts and everything. So we talk about things like that. And I got to travel with him on Air Force One once down to the Kennedy Space Center. And better than that, I got a chance to ride with him on Marine One, the helicopter that picked him up on the south lawn of the White House and took him out to Andrews Air Force Base. That was, for me as a Marine and an aviator, that was the thrill of a lifetime.
So what accomplishments are you most proud of during your tenure as NASA administrator? And any ideas or initiatives in hindsight you wish you had focused more attention on?
Oh, LaTroy, the list of things I wished I had the opportunity to focus more attention on is endless. Accomplishments, I would have to say that, the things in the people realm. I mean, it was great to send a rover to Mars. We sent the Curiosity rover there while I was the NASA administrator. But the thing important for me to remember as the administrator was anything that was accomplished in my 4 or 8 years as the administrator had more than likely been begun by one of my predecessors. You know, in an agency like NASA, one person does not make the difference. Everything that I focused on from a technological standpoint, every program or project, almost every single one of them fell on the next administrator to actually see it come into being. One of my favorite projects is the James Webb Space Telescope that eventually will replace the Hubble Space Telescope. James Webb came into being, and this will break your heart, came into being in 1996. We were supposed to launch it in 2007 before I became the NASA administrator. We were going to launch it in 2009, my first year as the NASA administrator. This was one of the things I did have to go to President Obama about and to the Senate Appropriations Committee to tell them that I had done a study or had a study done that said we were not going to be able to fly James Webb for years, that we needed to make some technical changes to it, some design changes, and we needed a lot more money. So I went in and talked to the president, talked to the Senate appropriators, and they agreed that we should go do that. So we were then going to launch James Webb in 2016, before President Obama left office, and that didn't happen. Then we're going to launch it in 2018. So we're saying we'll launch it before the end of this year, and I hope we do that. But proudest accomplishments were in the people area. We really fought for diversity and inclusion in the upper levels of leadership in the agency. I was fortunate enough to have 2 women as my deputies, had a phenomenal cast of experts who surrounded me that were broad in both in race and gender, not as broad as I would like. I ended up having a center director, Woodrow Whitlow, who was like the mayor of the Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. You know, you want the top leaders in the agency to look like the rest of America. So we were able to improve the diversity and inclusion at the agency. I became the chief diversity officer, so I was the champion. I told everybody in NASA and our contractors and our partners around the world that I was the champion for diversity, and I wanted everybody to do what I did. I wanted to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. I was very proud of the progress we made there, disappointed that we didn't go faster, incredibly proud of doing what President Obama asked us to do, which was reaching out to nations to become partners with NASA who otherwise might not have had an opportunity to become members of the family of spacefaring nations. He wanted us to try to find non-traditional partners. So by the time I left the agency, and this had started long before I became NASA administrator, but by the time I left, we had more than 800 active agreements with more than 200 and some odd foreign countries. Many of them were in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia. So countries like the United Arab Emirates, UAE, that now has a rover, has an orbiter orbiting Mars. They didn't even have a space agency when we came into office. And in 2014, with our help, they stood up the UAE Space Agency. Or you look at nations in Africa, like talking just the other day to folk representing the Rwandan Space Agency or the South African Space Agency, or those kinds of things were initiatives that President Obama had me start. And I'm really proud that we were able to plant the seed and try to get people around the world to believe that they could be a part of the family of spacefaring nations, and they too could participate and make a difference in space exploration.
All right, so you ended up ending your term as NASA administrator and retiring from the Marine Corps. So in 2017, you founded the Charles F. Bolden Group. Just speak about the creation and mission, like focusing on public benefit, executive advisory, problem solving, and engagement.
Yeah, I was a typical retiree, typical military or government retiree. I retired twice. I retired from the Marine Corps in 2003, and back then I formed a company that was called Jack and Panther LLC, and it was me. Mm-hmm. And it was named kind of a combination of my call sign in the Marine Corps was Panther. My wife's nickname is Jackie. So I took the two, stuck them together, and became Jack and Panther. And we were a consulting firm. It was a one-person consulting firm. And I did that for the 6 years until President Obama called me to take over as the NASA administrator. And then when I finished that tenure in 2017, I decided I would go ahead and stand the company back up again, and I would offer my services, consulting and advisory services, to anybody who needed it, mainly focusing on aeronautics and aerospace, leadership and executive development, focusing on diversity, inclusion, and equity, STEM education, and then what has come along has been the health initiatives. But again, like I said, that was a one-person operation. And I was beginning to say, I need to stop. I just need to go ahead and truly retire and lay back and travel with my wife, Jackie, and my son, Che, at the same time that I was thinking that, and my daughter, who's a doctor, Dr. Kelly Bolden, she's a plastic surgeon here in the DC area. She retired from the Marine Corps after 26 years in July of 2019. And he and my daughter said, you can't do that. You can't quit. You can't dissolve the company. So I said, okay, if you all are so smart, you take it and you run it. And so I gifted the company to the two of them and gave him 1% more than hers, since he didn't have a job at the time, and she did. And he has taken the company and really turned it into a legitimate executive advisory firm. So we focus on promoting aerospace and leadership in, as he says, in the global environment, focusing on principle-centered leadership, really trying to advance STEM and plus the arts and design. So we call it STEAMed education, trying to get young Black kids and kids of color and women into the technical fields. And then because our daughter is a doctor, she heads up the organization's health initiatives, trying to help people understand the critical importance of preventive health care and the like. We don't do as much of that currently as we would like to, but we're hoping that that'll be something we can do in the future. But we advise aeronautics companies on their contracts with the government. We're currently working on a project for the Commandant of the Marine Corps, helping him to look at the lack of diversity in the Marine Corps, particularly in the officer ranks, and most particularly in the aviation field where I came from. There, in the 246-year history of the Marine Corps, we've now had only 3 Black general officers who were aviators and only 2 of us who flew jets. And that's unsacked for an organization that's been around for 246 years. So the Bolden Group is working to support the Commandant and his efforts to find things he can do to advance diversity, inclusion, and equity in the Marine Corps. A lot easier, a lot harder than it sounds. Easier said than done with a 246-year-old organization that's steeped in tradition.
Mm-hmm. So I see you're enjoying that retirement. I see.
Yeah,
So
say that, yeah.
So before we close, feel free to share any other upcoming projects that you're involved in, or just anything else, like leaving us with some parting shots, words of wisdom. The floor is yours.
I don't know that I have any words of wisdom for your audience, LaTroy. I mean, let me thank you first of all for making this forum available to get word into our community, into the communities of color, particularly the Black community, because one of the things that I learned in my very first year as the NASA administrator, because of my background in education, my passion for education, it comes from my mom and dad. I convened an education summit at NASA headquarters for 2 days, and I brought in college presidents and heads of museums and you name it, and we filled up a conference room for 2 days, and we talked about things that NASA could do to promote STEM back then, but science, technology, engineering, and math. And one of the people who we had invited to participate was a young Black man who was the national president of the National Society of NSBE. Oh shoot, I can't believe this. It was the National Society of Black Engineers. But it was the student chapter, and he was the national president. And because President Obama, when I interviewed with him, had talked about how he wanted to inspire Black kids again to want to go to space and to want to be engineers and scientists. And so I took the word from the president, and I talked about how we wanted to inspire young people to do all this stuff. And he sat there and listened to me for about half a day, and he finally raised his hand. He said, Administrator Bolden, if I hear you use the word inspire one more time, I'm gonna puke. I was taken aback. I mean, we're in this room with all these college presidents and stuff, and here's this young kid telling me I'm gonna make him puke. And I said, I beg your pardon? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I appreciate your desire to want to inspire young people, but he said, we can't inspire anybody until they're informed. And he said, Black kids don't know what's available. And he made me immediately think back to my growing up in South Carolina. And if anybody had told me that I could be an engineer when I was in elementary and junior high school, even high school, I'd have told them, well, I love trains, but I don't want to drive a train, because that was an engineer in my life. We live right on not right on, but we were right not far away from the railroad tracks, as most Black communities were. And I love trains. I love riding on the train to Washington, D.C. and New York, but I never wanted to be an engineer, a train engineer. But I didn't know what engineers were, the kind that design and build things. And I thought about it, and I said, you're absolutely right. And so we changed our focus to trying to make it possible to inform young Black kids of what is available. They can do anything as long as they know it's there. That's why I say I applaud you for your forum, because what you're doing is you're trying to inform the community of what's available to us. And we can't do anything until we're so informed. Then we can inspire. And so, my mantra every time I go to a school or I speak to a professional group is, you got to study. I don't care how old you are, you got to study. You've always got to be trying to improve yourself. And the only way to do that is to study, study, study. Got to work hard. I talk about everybody wants to be a professional athlete of some kind. Every kid wants to be every young boy wants to be an NFL football player. You can't do that if you don't practice, if you don't work hard at it. So why should you expect to be good in your classroom if you don't study and work hard? And then the most important thing, which goes back to what my mom and dad told me, don't ever be afraid of failure. Don't not do something because somebody told you couldn't do it. Those words were the ones that came in my mind the night that those two white midshipmen came in my room. My mom and dad said, don't ever let anybody tell you what you cannot do. And that just kind of went right through me. So those are the three things I tell people: study hard, work hard, never, ever, ever be afraid of failure. I give that advice to people from 6 to 96. That's all I got.
Charlie, myself and the audience here at Stop, Look, and Listen, we're informed, we're inspired, and we're thankful to you for your contributions. And this was an amazing conversation. It's easily one of my favorite. For someone else that grew up in the state of South Carolina, when I was researching, I was like, I always try to think outside the box and get interviews that are somewhat different. And I was like, I would love to speak to an astronaut. So I started doing my research on you and Dr. Bluford and Mae Jameson and Robert Satcher and countless others. But I wanted you because you're from South Carolina, and I'm just thankful for this opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, and best of luck to you and to everybody in your audience. Stay safe and healthy.
All right. So for Stop, Look, and Listen, I'm your host, LaTroy Gardner. See you next week. Peace and blessings.
Thank you for checking us out on YouTube, and be sure to subscribe for more great content. And don't forget to check out our website at GOB Radio Network.com.